his opinion of an expert as opposed to what has been happening in Fry?
Representative Metz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when you say what has been happening in Fry, what you're referring to is the fact that in most cases the jury gets to decide the expert testimony versus the judge vetting it out ahead of time. And that's one of the precise reasons why the bill is good public policy, because it would allow the judiciary to vet the testimony using the standards that we give them in the bill, the three-prong analysis that I mentioned in my opening. That would empower the judges to make those determinations ahead of the jury getting the testimony, thereby creating greater accuracy in the outcomes.
Representative Rouson for follow-up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We've already heard that no prosecutor testified in favor of this, but is there any Criminal Law Professors Association or the Florida Justice Association or the Florida Bar Association, any group of legal experts that have testified in support of this other than businesses and corporations seeking something friendly?
Representative Metz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, there's some assumptions built into the question. I won't go there, but I was going to say that the policy that we're asking the legislature to consider in this bill is the same policy that is in the federal judiciary and a majority of other states. So we're looking at an experiential base that's pretty wide and far-reaching. And while we might not have had the individuals testifying that you implied in your question in every case, we had sufficient support for the bill in terms of the overall thrust of it, which is to try to create greater accuracy in the outcomes.
Representative Rouson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just so that I'm clear then, other than businesses, no law association of professors, of attorneys has indicated their support and urgent favorability for this bill. Is that right?
Representative Metz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't recall any law professors testifying at the hearing in either direction. I know we had a few state's attorneys, just a very few number of them. We had a number of people from the business community. And I don't believe there were any professors per se.
Further questions? Further questions? Representative Jenne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not quite sure who this question would go to, but a little earlier in questions and answers, we heard that this bill will make the courts more business-friendly. Is that a correct statement?
Representative Metz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure you heard that from me, but the idea of a court system that produces more accurate outcomes would ipso
So by that very nature, if it's going to be more business friendly, doesn't in turn that mean that it's going to be less consumer friendly?
Representative Metz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure how you would define consumer friendly, but if the definition is that you go to court and you get an accurate outcome and you get it swift and speedy and without great expense, then if this bill would allow that, then it would be a consumer-friendly bill under that definition. Now, if you have another definition and you want to elaborate, I'd be happy to take that question.
Representative Jenne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's based off the fact that the statement was made by a proponent of the bill that it would make the courts more business-friendly. That was just said on this floor less than 10 minutes ago. And I am not a lawyer by trade. But I do agree with you that the purpose of the courts is to dispense justice irrespective of station. But at the end of the day, what I'm concerned about is turning the courts into making it more business friendly. Do you think there's a problem aggressively going after the laws of this state and altering them so at the end of the day the courts are more friendly to business, and by simple math it's going to have to be less friendly to someone else? So I have a big concern about that, and I was just hoping you could elaborate a little bit more on that, because at this point I'm not going to be able to support this bill knowing that it's skewing things in favor of one particular group.
Representative Metz to answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, first of all, I would concur with the proposition that the court system should be open to all and impartial to all and not be friendly to one group or another by virtue of their station or status. So I think we agree with that. I think where you might have the question directed toward the courts being business friendly, I think the comment might have been directed to having the state of Florida a business-friendly environment, which I think we're all attempting to do, especially in this economy. And those components we've heard debated on this floor previously of taxation, regulation, and litigation. So when you take the litigation piece out and you apply this bill to that mix, I think what the goal is to create fair and impartial judicial outcomes that will not result in artificial distortions based on junk science testimony or otherwise.
Representative Metz, I know that you had discussed the Delaware study. Can you confirm whether or not it was pharmaceutical companies that funded that study?
Representative Metz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I cannot confirm or deny it.
Representative Soto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If it was, do you think that that would create an initial flaw or bias to the study?
Representative Metz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really don't have enough information to say that it is a biased study or not. I mean, I take it on its face value. It has facts and data within it. It talks about interviews with attorneys and judges, and it's done by the National Center for State Courts. If they got a grant funded by pharmaceutical companies that helped them pay for that, I would have to assume that they would have still maintained their integrity in performing the study. But I don't have any of the particulars that you're referring to, so I can't comment specifically.
Representative Soto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has any of these companies approached you or other legislators to try to push this legislation?
Representative Metz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No companies have contacted me directly that I can recall. I've had people contact me about the bill on both sides of it numerous times. I don't know about other legislators, what contacts they may or may not have had.
Representative Soto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the Delaware study, it appears that they stated that the case file reviewed as employed in Delaware was not an effective as a means for reliably identifying Delbert motions on a large scale because it was such a small state and such a small sample. Do you still feel confident in relying on that study?
Representative Metz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I do rely on the study, and I do feel comfortable relying on it. It's not the only underpinning of the bill. I mean, we have the numbers that I referred to earlier where we have 28 states that have gone to Delbert, 10 that remain pure fry, and others that are somewhere in between. So those numbers speak volumes for the reform, and we haven't learned of any states that have tried Delbert and then decided to go back to fry. At least I haven't been told that there are any such states.
Representative Soto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do you know generally how long these hearings can last?
Representative Metz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would really depend on the issues in play at the hearing. I've been in fry hearings before in state court, and they can be lengthy. I mean, there are evidentiary hearings in front of the court. So it really depends on what the issues are, what the stakes are. If it was simply one expert against another and they had a hearing on that, presumably that could be done in half a day. I had that last year, one like that, which was a fry hearing. I don't think it's going to take any longer to apply the standards per se. If the judge knows the standards in advance and the parties know the standards in advance and they all prepare for the hearing, then I don't think that's going to necessarily lengthen it per se. If you have a challenge under fry, you're going to have the same type of evidentiary back and forth.
Representative Soto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But Wouldn't you say with more than one factor that it would be more analysis at the very least in these hearings?
Representative Metz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly can foresee if it was a very hotly contested Daubert hearing where the issues were very significant to the case, the stakes were high, that more effort and expense would go into the hearing on both sides. And if the judge has to hear the facts and data and the principles and methods, that would be taking up time, and I can't say for sure that it would take longer than it would take for the expert to describe why it's generally accepted in the field. Presumably,